a legend as great as Valley Forge or the Alamo or Gettysburg. A legend that will live as long as America lives. A great new legend never before told of the greatest battle in American history. This is the legend of the Battle of the Bulge. The legend of the brave rifles.
Hello, I'm Arthur Kennedy, and we're at Elsenborn Ridge in Belgium. The climactic battle which brought the Second World War to its end was fought here. It was also the greatest pitched battle ever fought by Americans, the only major engagement ever waged by the United States in winter. And the 250,000 GIs who fought here did indeed create the great new legend of the brave rifles.
The forces that gave rise to this new American legend were born in the demented mind of Adolf Hitler, whose view of America was distorted and second-hand. Even when America ended the war and by June of 1944 had joined successfully with the British in the landings in Normandy, Hitler retained his own propaganda image of the Americans as soft and decadent. And he became increasingly drawn to an obsession that the Americans were the weak link in the grand alliance then threatening to encircle him. But for the Americans, these were the golden days of liberation, when the Allied love affair was new. Champagne moments when all these people, in one brief bubbling over of passion, cast off years of defeat and gave us their hearts. And in exchange, we gave them cigarettes and chewing gum and freedom.
We took turns playing Errol Flynn. They'd let A Company liberate the first city of the day, then B Company would liberate the second one. Never had it so good. All the way from Saginaw, Michigan. Too shy to ask a girl for a kiss. And all of a sudden, French girls, they're kissing me. Wait till I get back. Pucker up, I'll tell my girl. There's something I learned while serving my country.
As that warm summer embered into autumn, disasters like falling leaves descended on Germany. And Hitler realized that to remain on the defensive would be to wait for death to come. And so he formulated a desperate plan for reversing the tide. Trapped between the Russians moving in from the east and the Allies from the west, he planned a gigantic surprise attack against that spot where the Allies were weakest and most overconfident. In Belgium, against the decadent Americans spread in far too thin a line along the Ardennes, his panzers would break through, re-seize the port of Antwerp, split the Allied armies in two, and in history's greatest reversal, he, Adolf Hitler, would turn imminent defeat into final victory. For this last offensive, the Germans secretly hauled every last reserve of arms and men to the Belgian border. There, the rows of powerful new panzers were reviewed by 29-year-old SS Colonel Joachim Peiper, whose panzers were called the Blowtorch Battalion, because in Russia they'd found joy in burning defenseless towns and shooting unarmed civilians. Once again, Hitler held the dice, betting everything he had on this final all-or-nothing offensive, moving 3 secretly assembled armies to the tiny Ardennes sector and gambling on the seasonal storms of December. For as long as Allied airplanes were grounded by bad weather, the Nazi armies could attack in surprise, break through, and Hitler was sure, win. For the Allies, the Ardennes was a comparatively peaceful area where new divisions could be gently inoculated in combat and even find time to romp in the snow. And by December 15th, 1944, the GIs here were thinking mostly of Christmas. But the thoughts of these SS Panzermen were far less peaceful. They knew what they'd done in the past. They shared the desperation of their leader, Adolf Hitler, and they fully understood the battle orders now issued to them. Soldiers of the Western Front, we gamble everything. This battle, above all, must be fought with brutality in a wave of terror. Thus lives our Germany. By nightfall, 250,000 exhilarated Germans moved silently into attack positions. Across from them, 100,000 Americans slept unaware. At dawn, December 16th, the surprise reveille sounded for the Americans in the Ardennes. Within an hour, GI outposts and communications were knocked out, and their vehicles set afire. Then the shelling ceased, and from the cloak of fog, German infantrymen emerged, more and more of them, faster and faster. Soon the Panzers joined the attack. 30 crack German divisions, with complete surprise, had launched a full-scale offensive against only 6 American divisions. Especially in the center and south of the Ardennes, the surprise German tidal wave seemed invincible. Exultant, the German infantry strode past dead GIs and burning American vehicles. Spearheading the Panzer breakthrough, Piper and his blowtorch battalion bulled their way past every obstacle, raced all night, and by dawn of the second day were deep behind the American lines and still rolling unopposed toward the great goal of Antwerp. But at a crossroads near Malmedy, the Panzers ran into a lightly armed American artillery observation battalion. About 150 GIs surrendered, a highly unwelcome burden to the blowtorch battalion that had to keep moving. So they herded the GIs toward an open field, and suddenly an SS man fired at them, then another fired, then 8 machine guns combined mass production with mass murder. They'd had orders to wage a campaign of total terror, and this was it, a Rabatz. Rabatz, the SS word for joy in killing. The SS Panzers then raced on, regarding the murder of 115 Americans as trivial and the crossroads at Malmedy not worth holding. But miraculously, a few prisoners survived and escaped to tell their tale, a tale that spread to every GI in Europe. Especially once the snow-covered bodies of the victims were found and counted and removed for proper burial. For 3 years, the GIs had fought with no emotional spur, hating war, but not really hating the enemy. Now, from Malmedy on, there would be a new GI, spurred by hatred and the realization that he could never surrender. If you were to die anyway, then die fighting. As still another weapon in his campaign of total terror, Hitler the Gambler had loaded the dice. He had assigned Scorzini, the top Nazi commando, to secretly train a brigade of 2,000 English-speaking SS men to act like Americans, to chew gum perpetually, and issued captured GI uniforms and vehicles to seize bridges, give false orders, and spread terror everywhere behind the American lines. But only 7 German-driven jeeps ever got through, and when just one of those 7 jeeps began running out of gas, its English-speaking spy team asked some GIs where they could get some petrol, please. They'd spoken the wrong kind of English. The real GIs captured them, searched them. Beneath the American outer uniforms, there was German underwear. This German then revealed the existence of an entire brigade of English-speaking saboteurs. Confused and suspicious, the GIs then improvised roadblocks everywhere behind their lines, not only interrogating civilians, but each other.
Nervous? We was looking for crust beneath every bed and bush in Belgium. Trouble was, how could you tell one if you found one? Wearing our clothes, driving our Jeep, speaking English as good as you and me. I stuck my M1 into the belly of everybody who went by. 2 feet on up to Big Brass, and I asked questions. Like, who plays left field for the Red Sox? Who's Orphan Annie's old man? And, what's the capital of California? And they better answer right back, San Francisco.
While the Americans were confused, the German generals kept dispatching angry orders to their divisional commanders. Schnell, mach schnell, get moving. If there's opposition, bypass it, but get on. Break through today, tomorrow at the latest. They must take 3 essential objectives: Elsenborn Ridge, St. Vith, and Bastogne. In the St. Vith sector, Piper's panzers were approaching the crucial bridges at Trois Ponts. Feverishly digging in for a fight there were just 150 combat engineers, assigned only to operate a local sawmill. They could have withdrawn, but instead they decided to fight and to wire the key bridge with explosives, determined one way or another that the Germans would never get across that bridge. Watching the engineers were 4 lost GI gunners. The half-track towing their gun had broken down, and their outfit had gone on without them. Even as the engineers raced to get ready, Piper's panzers approached the outskirts of the town. Desperate to complete the wiring of the bridge, the engineers turned to the 4 gunners and asked them to station their gun ahead of the bridge and to hold off the entire column of tanks as long as they and their lone gun lasted. And so these 4 GIs stood alone, out front, and began firing at the onrushing German column. Soon one of the GI shells hit Piper's lead tank. The entire German column was held up, but they trained all their weapons on the one small American gun. The David and Goliath duel lasted for only 15 minutes. Then a German shell hit the lone gun and killed all 4 GIs. At the very same moment, the engineers completed wiring the bridge. The panzers, their direct route destroyed, would now have to follow a slow and difficult detour. Just 4 GIs had given their country 15 minutes and a significant advantage. The 4 dead Americans were Private First Class Lillard McCollum, age 27, of Louisville, Kentucky. Private James Higgins, 21, of Garberville, California. Private Dallas Buchanan, age 19, of Colville, Washington. and Corporal Donald Hollenbeck, also 19, of Fresno, California.
Just a few guys, sharing together every damn minute of the day and night. Each guy's life dependent on the other guy's doing his job. Just a squad of guys. In their eyes, you're somebody, or you're nobody. Who do we fight for? Country? Constitution? Mother, wife, girl? They're far away. No longer part of our world. Our world is here. This frozen hell shared with 10 or so other guys. Guys I hadn't even heard of a year ago. Guys I'd never see again if the war were over. Just 10 or so guys. They're the only world I now know, or that matters. Who do you fight for? Live for? Die for? For each other. There really is no one else.
The Belgian refugees spread the news of the German breakthrough, and through all of newly liberated Europe, pessimism spread like a plague. A pessimism that seemed justified, especially with the two surrounded regiments of the 106th Division already discussing procedures for surrender. Yet hundreds of the young GIs of this division, refusing to surrender, slipped off into the dense forests and fought their way out to freedom. And Lieutenant Eric Wood of Bedford, Pennsylvania, repeatedly risked his life to get just 3 of the 12 big guns he commanded out ahead of the onrushing Germans. Once his guns were safely out, he slipped off into the forest and for days led a band of American guerrillas that terrorized the German rear. When Wood was found in the forest dead, the bodies of 7 dead German soldiers were found with him. But the majority of the surrounded 106th Division surrendered, except for Bataan, the greatest mass battlefield surrender in American history. Desperate to stop the German breakthrough, Company C of the 740th Tank Battalion, never before in combat and having just arrived in Europe without any equipment of its own, worked all through the night and most of the day cannibalizing 25 crippled tanks in order to get just 15 in running condition. Now these 15 patched up heaps of armor, many without radios, spare parts, or extra ammunition, headed east. These combat virgins were out looking for Germans. Soon they found them, the Blowtorch Battalion, the blood-soaked veterans of Russia and Malmedy. And these experienced panzermen had heavier tanks and bigger guns. But the GIs were faster on the draw. The Panzer went up in flames. Then another of Piper's tanks rounded a curve into range. And the second Nazi tank caught fire. Then a third Panzer poked around the curve. Again, the lead American tank fired first. And the third German tank burst into flames. The Nazis had it. Piper's up to now invincible Panzers, the leaders of the German breakthrough, retreated and raced back for safety. Once again, a handful of men who stood and fought with skill and courage were able to shape the outcome of an entire battle and war. The leader of the American Mickey Mouse tank outfit was Captain James Berry of Smyrna, Tennessee. The marksman in the lead tank, who had never before fired in combat, was Lieutenant Charles Powers of Chicago, Illinois. Inspired by this amazing reversal, the American infantry raced after the fleeing panzers and surrounded them. The blowtorch battalion would no longer be a factor in the great battle. The night of Piper's defeat, other Germans throughout the gloomy Ardennes began seeing and hearing ghosts. In the north, one group saw the lights of what seemed to be a huge American convoy. Actually, Major Robert E. Yates of Marshall, Texas, kept sending his 6 trucks up the road with their lights on, then down again with their lights off, round and round all night, the same 6 trucks. Convinced they had run into an entire American division, the German tankers put off their attack in this sector. Similarly, outside Bastogne, the Panzermen suddenly held up their drive, as if afraid of the darkness, afraid of the fog, afraid of the ghost-like American army. They spent a nervous night listening to strange noises. And while this much stronger German force watched and waited, the 101st Airborne that morning rolled unopposed into Bastogne. In addition to the newly arrived paratroopers, all that defended this absolutely essential objective were elements of the 10th, hastily camouflaging themselves for winter warfare, a few artillery units, including a veteran battalion of 155mm gunners, and a ragtag collection of stragglers called Combat Team Follow-Up, who as individuals chose to stand and fight. As for the Germans, their fears had vanished with the night. In daylight, they quickly snapped a steel ring around Bastogne. And Hitler's incredible luck with the weather was still holding. As soon as the Bastogne trap was shut, a heavy snow began to fall throughout the Ardennes.
We sit around and wait for somebody to sing out, "Here they come." And then it'll start all over again. For laughs, some joker says, "What do you guys like most right now?" And one guy says, "A thick, juicy steak." And another guy says, "Rita Hayworth." And I say, "A pair of dry socks." 'Cause what's important to a man here ain't meat or a woman, but 10 warm toes.
But here it was warm, and warmer still were Hitler's directives to his commanders in Belgium. All was at stake, their desperately needed victory lost if they did not at once smash through on the 3 key sectors: Elsenborn, Bastogne, and above all, St. Vith. For now, this climactic battle had a distinctive shape and name: the Bulge. And to Adolf Hitler, the GI-held peninsula of St. Vith looked like a knife that could cut the throat of his all-or-nothing offensive. And so he sent direct orders to Baron von Manteuffel to take St. Vith at once and at all costs. For 3 straight days, Manteuffel had sent 6 of his divisions against St. Vith, which was held principally by only one American division, the 7th Armored. Battered again and again, the badly outnumbered GIs somehow held on, though their ranks became steadily depleted and their ammunition dangerously low. Lashed on by Hitler, the Baron determined on one last climactic attack. All day long, therefore, he sent tide after tide against the few Americans who still held St. Vith. But by day's end, Manteuffel's divisions had again failed to take the town. So they continued the attacks on an even larger scale, on into the night. Finally, the battered survivors of the 7th Armored Division were ordered to pull out. Against overwhelming odds, these men had somehow held on to St. Vith for 7 days and 7 nights. They had, in the words of Winston Churchill, performed the highest acts of soldierly devotion. But lofty words about soldierly devotion would have no real meaning to the men now moving up to bolster the line in Belgium. The GI would feel naked without his mask of cynicism, and he was, above all, a realist about warfare. The GI fought because he had to, and in the Bulge, to the total surprise of the Germans, he was fighting magnificently because he had to, and he would die for his country if he had to, not out of fanaticism, but because he could accept with courage the cruel logic of being stuck in that time and place where there was no other choice.
When did courage come? When you're young, you don't believe you can die. Only here, you soon wise up. The moment comes when every soldier stands apart from his living self, stares into his own grave, becomes his own chief mourner. All that first night of combat, I cried to myself. What a waste for me to die, I cried. So young, so strong, so full of desire. By dawn, I'd run dry of tears. I realized the world will go on without me. The world will go on. And when you realize how insignificant you are, then you can accept your own death. Then at last you're a man. A man. And courage has come.
Now that Adolf Hitler had St. Vith, he demanded the other key prizes, Bastogne, and more important, Elsenborn Ridge. To the Elsenborn sector, Hitler had assigned his strongest army, the 6th Panzers, commanded by burly, boozing Sepp Dietrich, nicknamed the Butcher, since he started as a butcher in a meat market in Bavaria. But after 6 straight days of futile assaults against Elsenborn Ridge, Butcher Dietrich was drinking heavily and sending apologetic messages to his Fuhrer, promising they'd really break through at Elsenborn tomorrow for sure. But Hitler knew he was running out of tomorrows. He demanded Elsenborn today. One last massive assault, Dietrich then drunkenly demanded. When earth and snow and sky again were still, the Butcher's panzers and infantry moved out for the 7th straight day of assault on the snowbound ridge. On its sector, the American 99th Division held. So too did the 2nd Division, and the 30th Division, and the 9th Division. But on the 1st Division sector, the Germans broke through, cleaving a gap a half a mile wide. Quickly, Dietrich shot reinforcements through the gap, confident that at last he could report to the Fuhrer they were on the road to Antwerp. But the 1st Division wasn't beaten yet. In the last of the 9th rally, they threw every last GI into the line. Steadily, individual riflemen picked off every German who moved. Within a few hours, no more Germans were moving. Every infantryman who had broken through was dead, and their bodies piled up and froze in the grotesque position in which they fell. Soon the drifting snow veiled this macabre ballet. These Nazi dances would not be seen until spring. The GIs here had made the greatest day-after-day defensive stand the American army has ever made, and Hitler's hopes of a quick smash north to Antwerp were smothered in the snow of Elsenborn Ridge.
Me, the portrait photographer. Babies, bar mitzvahs, weddings. Never shot a face that wasn't smiling until I got here. Here. Sure, it's a great idea to shoot the war, but not when they're shooting back at you. You think there'd be a limit. Yet each day the lieutenant says, just one more. Shoot just one more patrol. One more skirmish. One more town. Always just one more. One more notch of misery. There is no limit to what a human being will put up with. Even a cameraman, if he has to. And if miseries fall on him like snowflakes, one at a time.
At Bastogne, Hitler's third great goal, the besieged GIs exuded a brash self-confidence, the cockiness of those who had been consigned to hell and somehow survived. Thus, when a Panzer delegation arrived with a surrender note, the GIs, even though surrounded, simply assumed it was the Germans who were trying to surrender. They breezily took advantage of the brief truce by shaving, eating, and catching up on their reading, while their commander, General McAuliffe, reflected the cockiness of his men when, to the Germans' formal demand for surrender, McAuliffe simply replied, "Nuts." McAuliffe's reply captured public imagination everywhere and obscured the fact that the persistent Hitler weather made an airlift of supplies to Bastogne far too great a risk. And though relief columns, both British and American, were on their way, it was doubtful if the steel cavalry could get there in time. But no gambler's luck holds forever. On the 8th day of the great battle, Hitler's luck ran out. Suddenly the skies were cold and clear and filled with the American Air Force. In surrounded Bastogne, things were looking up. For on this day, neither flak nor fire would stop the Air Force from paying off on their promise to the foot soldiers below. In the northwestern sector, part of an artillery battalion with an entire panzer division at their heels rolled up to an obscure crossroads. They carried with them the very same 3 guns that in the first days of the German breakthrough, Lieutenant Eric Wood had fought and died a one-man war to save. As the battalion commander, Major Arthur Parker of Leeds, Alabama, studied his map, he came to the amazing conclusion that this crossroads controlled the paved highway to Antwerp. He was thus standing on the strategic key to Northwest Europe. Parker then decided that he and his 3 guns would dig in the hills above and defend the crossroads if need be against the entire German army. And as other GIs fled through the road junction, Parker talked many of them into joining his impromptu combat team, though they knew they were making virtually a life or death choice. But the Germans could also analyze maps. They sent the entire 58th Panzer Corps against the tiny GI force. But the GIs, with a tremendous display of courage, beat off every attack. Yet their casualties were heavy, and Major Parker was too seriously wounded to continue in command. Major Elliot Goldstein of Atlanta, Georgia, then took over, and Goldstein's makeshift group continued to bar the vital highway to the Panzers. Then against a hurricane of German men in armor, the little force was overwhelmed. But thanks to a few courageous GIs, fresh Allied divisions were given time to arrive in the Ardennes. And Hitler was learning that a commander must keep his eyes not only on the map, but on the clock. For some, on December 25th, there was a brief timeout in honor of the Prince of Peace.
I captured him on Christmas Day, and my first thought was to kill him. This sniveling nuisance, this two-faced hunk of hate. Who needs him? What good is he? The simplest would be to erase him from this earth. But then, who am I to judge them? To hold a rifle doesn't make you God. What are they really like, I wondered? Some are old, some are young, and some are forever lost. Yet steep them in snow and they get frostbite. Scare them and they cry. Wound them and they bleed. What are they really like? They are, most of them, like us.
On Christmas Day near Parker's Crossroads, a patrol from the American 2nd Armored Division spotted the German 2nd Armored Division nesting in the woods and obviously out of gas. Quickly, the American 2nd Armored got ready for combat, while their commander, Ernie Harmon, roared with pleasure, "The buzzards are in the bag, in the bag." Soon, they were rolling. On the day after Christmas, the American 2nd Armored met the German 2nd Armored nose to nose in hundreds of bitter duels in the forests and hills. Steadily, panzer after panzer, as promised by Ernie Harmon, was put in the bag. Suddenly, a German column threatened to come to the rescue of their dying comrades. But out of the blue, for it was no longer Hitler weather, the Royal Air Force swooped down. This German threat, too, went up in smoke. On that same day, a lone armored battalion was steadily slogging its way towards surrounded Bastogne, only 5 miles away. But halfway from their goal, the entire column was held up by 2 German 88s. The course of the battle and of history was determined by one GI who charged alone straight for the German guns. He killed the first 2 German gunners he met. Then he charged again. As in a war movie, the remaining German gun crews panicked and surrendered. The lone American, who later won the Congressional Medal of Honor for his one-man attack, was a 19-year-old farm boy from Lepanto, Arkansas, Private Jimmy Hendricks. Now the GI tanks resumed their headlong drive. Soon they raced into a snow-covered clearing. Ahead were a group of soldiers. The soldiers were American paratroopers. Bastogne was no longer surrounded. It was a moment not only for jubilation, but for reflection.
Dear Mom, this is the letter I gotta get out of my system. The letter without the lies. You ask how I am? Fine. Only cold all the time. And dead tired. But I better get off that subject. Remember Andy? Came home with me in that 3-day pass? He won't be coming home anymore. But I'm coming home, Ma. That's all I think about. Home. Whenever I'm pinned down, the shells are shouting the snow all around me. There is a way home, I think. A sure way home. Better get home alive than never get home at all. What if I raise my arms? Just over the top. Just an inch or 2. Remember what I used to say when I was a kid? Look, Ma, no hands. Don't worry. I'm not really gonna do it. Your loving son.
Now in January, the Allies decided, with Hitler's troops still pinned down in the Bulge, that here and now, then, now was the time for the great counterblow. Now, despite the deep snow. Now, when only foot soldiers could maneuver. Now, in the greatest ordeal any mass American army had ever experienced. Now.
I'm hit. I heard somebody yelling, and it was me who was yelling, I'm hit. Not so much in pain as surprise. It's just what I've been expecting, but not really. Then the pain set in, and the weakness, and worst of all, the panic. Then from somewhere a medic appeared, and poured sulfur in the hole in my face, and stopped the bleeding, and under his armpit where he kept the morphine from freezing, took out a vial and gave me a shot. Then they carried me out. Soon I was wrapped in blankets, and I asked, "Where are we going?" And the medic said, "To an airfield." Then where, I asked. And he said, "Home, buddy. You just won your ticket home." Home. My rifle company had a casualty rate of over 100%. With odds like that, I'd had only 2 chances. Be killed or be wounded. But now in the ambulance, it was dark, and I was safe and warm. I'd been given a new life, I realized. I was getting out alive. I was going to live. This day, I knew then, I would ever after celebrate as a birthday. This day in Belgium, was the happiest day of my life.
Even as the GIs threatened to cut the Bulge in two, the German High Command failed to pull their troops out. Hitler was committing the same mistake in the West that he had made in the East at Stalingrad. And again, it was his men who were paying for their dictator's mistakes. Relentlessly, the GI was burying Hitler's final hopes for victory in the snowdrifts along the roads of Belgium. Within a month after Hitler launched his last desperate offensive, the American 1st and 3rd Armies fought to a triumphant junction, thus setting up not only the end of this climactic battle, but of the war itself.
These weren't the guys I come in with in the old 83rd. Too many of the old gang have been left behind. In the swamps at Carrington, the streets of St. Malo, the forest at Hurtgen. And those who lived, only the dog tag stayed the same. We changed in the Bulge. Learned to live in snow. To eat nothing but cold rations. And always keep firing. Keep moving, never let up. Too many of our buddies died in Belgium. And something in us died too. What died was the softness in our bodies and our hearts. It was them or us. Kill them. Kill them. Kill them. That was the only way we'd ever get home.
The Germans lost over 100,000 in dead and wounded in the Bulge, and long, long lines of prisoners. Though American casualties were also heavy, these German soldiers were irreplaceable. And when the Russians rammed straight for Berlin, the Nazis had no reserves with which to stop them. The failure of Hitler's desperate gamble in the West made total disaster inevitable in both East and West. And soon after the great battle ended for these Germans in Belgium, Hitler also was dead, and Nazism kaput. The Bulge was thus the final decisive battle of the war, and in Churchill's opinion, the war's greatest American victory. On New Year's Day, 1945, General Patton sent this lasting tribute to the GIs who fought in the Bulge. Brave rifles, veterans, you have been baptized in fire and blood and have come out steel. The Battle of the Bulge was not only the greatest American victory of all time, but was, above all, a vindication of the democratic faith in the individual. For the fate of this crucial battle was determined in the first few days of defeat and confusion, when individual GIs by ones and twos and tens, numb in body and spirit, without compulsion or witnesses or reasons they could ever put into words, said to themselves, "This is as far as I go. Here I stand, and I guess die." The legend of the Brave Rifles is thus the traditional American legend. The loner, the reluctant fighter, against his will forced to fight, and then fighting magnificently. Clearly and forever, the individual GIs who won this battle proved the democratic creed that every man is important. Each life has value, and the life of one man can shape the lives of all men. The individual is important. The individual.